We live in something of a golden age for video game crossovers. It seems like every other day there's an announcement for a new fighting game guest character, a new cross-promotional mobile game, or a new costume in your favorite online battle royale. It makes sense that crossovers would be popular, as they're often a recipe for instant hype. After all, if thing number 1 is awesome and thing number 2 is also awesome, then putting both things together would have to make something really awesome. Right? Well, that's the hope anyway, but while some crossover ideas sound like a match made in heaven, others sound more like an idea hastily scrawled on a napkin after a late night of debauchery. Are the games we're talking about today all bad crossovers? Not at all. In fact, some of them rank among the best games of their generation. But all of them did make us wonder, who in the world actually asked for this? I'm Peter from Triple Jump, and here are 10 weird crossovers that nobody asked for. Number 10. Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. Marvel and DC have long been competitors in the realm of superhero comics, always eager to outdo the other, so it makes sense that DC would eventually do their own take on the Marvel vs. Capcom idea, and thus Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe was born. While having Batman and the Flash engage in fisticuffs with the likes of Scorpion and Sub-Zero isn't the worst idea in the world, the premise led to many baffling complications. For one, how do characters that are simply mundane humans battle the likes of Superman, a guy who can destroy entire solar systems when he sneezes? The answer was a pretty lame plot about universes colliding and a magical force called Rage that somehow makes people like the Joker capable of punching out literal gods. The larger issue, though, was the game's violence, as DC's caped heroes couldn't be shown wantonly murdering their opponents, but Mortal Kombat characters couldn't not murder everyone in sight. The compromise, then, was to give the DC Universe good guys their own heroic brutalities that simply left the opponent unconscious, while the rest of the roster got properly lethal fatalities. But even these were severely watered down compared to past games in the MK franchise. In the end, Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, though not a bad title overall, did end up being the worst of both worlds and the best of neither. Number 9. Dream Mix TV World Fighters. Super Smash Bros. Is one of the most popular game series ever, with every installment becoming a staple in many a late-night gaming session. And with such rampant success, copycats were inevitable. One of the earliest attempts at the formula was Dream Mix TV World Fighters, a three-way crossover between Konami, the creators of Castlevania and Metal Gear, Hudson, the creators of Bomberman and Bloody Roar, and Takara, the toy manufacturers best known in the West for the Transformers franchise. Altogether, it made for an eclectic roster, to say the least. Rather than aping Smash's gameplay style completely, Dream Mix instead has up to 4 players fighting to bash coins out of each other's bodies. The title Dream Mix is appropriate, as seeing such wildly contrasting characters knocking each other about feels like something, well, out of a dream. In a way, it was ahead of its time, as it beat games like Rivals of Aether and Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl to the punch by a decade or more, though sadly it was exclusive to Japan. I'm really not sure how a game where Simon Belmont can fight Optimus Prime came about in the first place, but the biggest mystery of all is why they thought that none of us in the West would want it. Number 8. Pokémon Conquest. I've been saying it for years and I'll say it again. History would be so much more interesting if there were Pokémon in it. Fortunately, it seems someone at the Pokémon Company had the same idea, and that is what gave us Pokémon Conquest. Probably, I don't really know the backstory. Positioned as a crossover between the collecting and battling gameplay of Pokémon and the grand strategy style of Nobunaga's Ambition series, Pokémon Conquest drops players into a feudal Japan-inspired world being torn apart by conflict, and it's up to them to unite the warring states before someone else does it first. Rather than accomplishing this through economic trade and political marriages, however, it's mostly accomplished through Pokémon battles, of course. Conquest lacks the granular degree of control from Nobunaga's Ambition and limits the arsenal of each Pokémon to only one attack. Recruiting Pokémon works differently too, as rather than throwing balls at them, you instead engage in a timing-based rhythm minigame to form a bond with wild monsters. Pokémon Conquest definitely came out of left field when it was first announced, but it ended up being one of the better Pokémon spin-offs of its era. Best of all, since it features characters based on actual historical figures, it's also educational. Finally, learning is fun again. Number 7. Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE. In 2013, Nintendo announced a new project in development known only as Shin Megami Tensei X Fire Emblem, presumably some kind of crossover between their acclaimed strategy series and the RPG Mega franchise from Atlus. It was hard to know for certain at the time because the reveal trailer, if you could call it that, was little more than a showcase of reused character art, meaning it was either extremely early in development or some kind of slideshow simulation game. Things went so quiet afterward that people began to fear the project had been cancelled, only for it to resurface 2 years later under the title Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE, where it was revealed to be a bright, colourful RPG about teenagers in Japan chasing their dreams in the entertainment industry, instead of literally anything that anyone was expecting it to be. Despite still being advertised as a crossover, it was rather light on elements from either series, adopting the style of Shin Megami Tensei and only a handful of characters from Fire Emblem to instead focus on a cast of original characters. It was certainly a curveball for many who were expecting something else, but it still ended up being heralded as one of the best games on the Wii U. Not a particularly competitive category, maybe, but impressive all the same. Number 6. Project Cross Zone. There are few series out there who've carved a name for themselves in the pantheon of fighting games, quite like Street Fighter and Tekken, two franchises that had a very much expected crossover that sadly didn't quite live up to its potential. The clear solution to that then was to add even more ingredients to the mix. When Capcom, Namco and Sega all joined forces to make a game for the 3DS, it represented a meeting between three companies with some of the strongest fighting game libraries under their belts. Not just Street Fighter and Tekken, but Virtua Fighter, Soul Calibur, Darkstalkers, and more. So what kind of action did these fighting game mascots get into together? A turn-based strategy game, of course. Project Cross Zone puts players in charge of a veritable army of mascots from the three companies in a struggle against the forces of evil. Yet even with so many recognizable characters at its disposal, the game still chose to focus the story on a pair of new faces. What's more, Project Cross Zone was technically a sequel to an earlier crossover, Namco Cross Capcom, which never released outside of Japan, and therefore served as a continuation of a story that most had never played before. God, asking us to do homework before we play a video game? Good luck with that. Number 5. Crash Purple and Spyro Orange. Once upon a time, Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon were crown princes of the PlayStation, two platforming icons arguably on the same level as Mario in their heyday at least, and rather than being adversaries, the two were actually comrades, more than happy to pop in for the odd cameo in each other's games. Thus, it seemed only inevitable that the two would eventually join forces in a proper crossover, though when that did happen, it was surprisingly on the Game Boy Advance rather than the PlayStation. What's perhaps not surprising though is that as a direct result of this decision, the games were not that great. Most players would have loved to see their favourite Bandicoot and Dragon bouncing around together in a platforming adventure, but what they got instead was a pair of threadbare minigame collections with fewer platforms than a very small train station. Even worse, the titular heroes barely interacted in their own crossover, and when they did share screen time during gameplay, they were busy throwing Molotov cocktails at each other for some reason. Putting Crash and Spyro together was a no-brainer decision, but the end result is a weird mishmash of ill-fitting ideas that ends up feeling like two square pegs in a round hole, leaving the perfect crossover this could have been just as imaginary as dragons and bandicoots. Wait, what does that say? Bandicoots are real? What? No, they're not. Number 4. Crystal Crisis. Block-based puzzle games have come a long way since Tetris, being mashed together, going to medical school, and even taking to fighting in the streets. Nicalis is a video game developer and publisher known for both their own IPs and for having a hand in publishing titles like Cave Story and The Binding of Isaac. They experimented with the idea of doing a crossover title in the fighting game Blade Strangers, a mashup of their own characters and notable indie game mascots, but then they really stepped things up in the crossover department with Crystal Crisis. Rather than being a fighting game, Crystal Crisis is a spiritual successor to Puzzle Fighter, as a head-to-head competitive puzzle game where two opposing combatants compete to drop blocks on each other. The characters in question, however, were drawn from a variety of sources. There are several Nicalis mascots, naturally, but also a few characters from upcoming games that hadn't even been revealed yet. Ho, spicy! On top of that, there are also several other indie mascots, characters from the works of legendary manga artist Osamu Tezuka, like Astro Boy, and, for whatever reason, Johnny Turbo, the much maligned advertising mascot for the TurboGrafx 16 console. True legends never die, I suppose. Number 3. Kingdom Hearts. This next entry is one that probably needs no introduction for most of you, but for anyone who's been in a coma since the year 2000, Kingdom Hearts has become one of the most recognizable and popular video game franchises of the 21st century, and it all started with an incredibly lucky coincidence. As the story goes, Square Enix wanted to make a 3D action game that could compete with Mario, but lamented that only Disney characters could rival the mascot recognition of Nintendo's Plumber. By a stroke of good fortune, though, one of the game's producers happened to share a ride in an elevator, or lift if you want to get British about this, with a Disney executive, and pitched a project that would cross over Disney's characters with those from Final Fantasy. That project would become Kingdom Hearts. It was the talk of the town after its announcement, as gamers everywhere tried to collectively wrap their minds around the concept of dark and moody heroes of the Final Fantasy series crossing over into the cartoony worlds of Disney movies. For a time, Kingdom Hearts was practically the poster child for weird crossovers, with many seeing it as nothing more than a joke for its dense plot and the bizarre visuals that come with this kind of crossover territory. Over a dozen games later though, and with millions of copies sold, I'd say the joke is on them. Number 2. City Shrouded in Shadow. Who doesn't love watching giant monsters duking it out? Never mind the millions of dollars in property damage, I just want to see a giant lizard fight a giant crab for my giant amusement. Fortunately, video games are a wonderful means to scratch this particular itch, as we've been blessed with dozens of games over the years to let us pit our favourite classic kaiju against each other. But there's never been one that offered the ideal crossover experience for monster fans. That is, until the release of City Shrouded in Shadow. On paper, it does sound like a dream come true, as it pulls monsters and mechas from several different franchises, including Godzilla, Gamera, Evangelion, and Ultraman, and puts them together in one package for the first time. Fans may be a bit deflated to find they won't be playing as any of the famous kaiju, however, as it's instead a survival action game where you play as a human attempting to escape the city in the middle of a giant monster attack. Another odd choice is there's no cross-pollination between the different licensed properties in the game, as the kaiju are locked into levels only featuring their own universe. For what it is, the game was quite good, but it wasn't the epic clash of titans that many fans were yearning to see. And number 1, Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle. Remember Rayman? The helicopter-haired hero used to be Ubisoft's de facto mascot back in the day, but much of his former popularity has since been usurped by a certain gaggle of screaming lagomorphs. The Rabbids initially rocketed to popularity as Rayman's new baddies, but eventually spun off into their own series of minigame collections and shopping cart simulators. And though Rayman towed the line of crossing over with the famous Super Mario on a few occasions, it ended up being the Rabbids who would make a proper foray into the Mushroom Kingdom. When it was first announced, Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle drew a healthy amount of skepticism from gaming fans, who were, frankly, a little tired of the Rabbids at this point. It was also bizarre to see Mario and his ilk toting firearms alongside Rabbidified versions of classic characters in what appeared to be a strategy game. But what was likely the most shocking thing about the game was how good it actually was, receiving largely positive reviews from critics forced to eat their words after voicing their own doubts about the idea. Kingdom Battle went on to become the best-selling Switch game not published by Nintendo, and received a sequel that most considered to be even better. It seems that the Rabbids weren't the only ones raving about this project.